Today, we're going to take a walk through Old West Tampa, one of the kind of forgotten neighborhoods from Tampa Bay area. We are now on Main Street of Old West Tampa, which is one of four neighborhoods in the larger neighborhood of West Tampa, along with Bowman Heights, Northeast McFarland, and Marina Club. Old West Tampa has a lot of old buildings and streets like this Main Street. If you know Tampa, it's mostly a post-World War II kind of generic suburban metro area, and Ybor City. But there's another old part of Tampa Bay, and that's this area that we're in right now, but it's kind of forgotten. Not a lot of people know about Old West Tampa, which was actually at one time a bigger cigar manufacturer than the more famous Ybor City to the east of Tampa. Old West Tampa borders are I-275 to the south, which you can kind of see down here. Rome Avenue to the east, St. Joseph Street to the north, and Armenia Avenue to the west. The neighborhood has a population of about 2,000. Kind of interesting statistic is that the average income here is only $24,000 per household, which is less than a third of the national average, but average home prices are nearly $400,000. Now, it is only 1.7 miles away from downtown Tampa, so that may explain the high real estate prices, but with that average income, it would seem kind of hard to afford for the people who live here. This is a mural on the side of the Simonitz building, which was a general store. This was a store built in 1920, and you can kind of tell from the look of the facade, it's a very old building, not restored in its original state. And we're gonna see a lot of that on our tour today, a lot of old style buildings from the first half of the 20th century. Again, something pretty unusual for those who live in Tampa. There's not a lot of really old stuff here, so this is a unique neighborhood for the Tampa Bay area. On our walk today, we're going to see some of the cigar factories, the former cigar factories that were so important in this area in the first half of the 20th century. You can see some of the very old stores on Main Street. And it's quiet here, it's empty. But it wasn't like that all the time. If you see these pictures from this one from 1918, this was once a pretty happening intersection as we approach the intersection of Main Street and Howard Avenue. To my right is Salsinas Park. Unfortunately, it's closed for renovations. It looks more like a plaza. It's built in honor of one of the key people, who's Emiliano Salsinas. His son, E.J. Salsinas, is a historian, has some videos on YouTube himself, E.J. Salsinas. Check it out. I watched one myself before doing this tour. He has some good, interesting insights to the area where he grew up. Here in front of us is one of the most important buildings in Old West Tampa. It served as the Bank of West Tampa. It was built in 1917. I'm taking the other side. This is the bank that served the area from 1907 to 1933, at which point it got consolidated with some other banks and eventually closed. Then it became, for many decades, it was the 4th of July Cafe, but that closed in 2017. And now it is Katrina's Taco and Tequila. So, looks like a cool place. But yeah, this is here on the corner of Main and Howard, which is basically the main intersection of what was once a bustling city. And it was a city. From 1895 to 1925, West Tampa was a city independent from Tampa. But in 1925, it was incorporated into the city of Tampa, as was happening with a lot of cities in the early 1900s. If you remember, in New York, at one time, Brooklyn and the Bronx were all separate from New York until 1898. Well, that same kind of phenomenon was happening in Tampa in the early 1900s, where there were several annexations. So this became Tampa in 1925, but for 30 years was its own separate city. In front of us is the West Tampa Public Library. This was built in 1914 and has been continuously operating since then. It was funded with a grant from the steel magnate Andrew Carnegie, who funded many different libraries throughout, but particularly in Florida. In front of us is the West Tampa Post Office. And across the street's a pretty cool looking building. This is the Guida building. The Guida family came from Sicily here in the early 1940s. The building has served as a grocery store, a furniture store, a theater, and since 2011, it's been the location for the Revive Church of Tampa. Now, those of you who live in Tampa know that the other old part of Tampa, Ybor City, is a very popular night spot destination. Leverages its historic past, very retro. But this area, no one really knows about it. I think a lot of people that even live here see it on the side of the highway going towards the airport or going from downtown. Never really explore it. To the left is Alessi's Bakery, the original location. Some of you might be familiar with the current location that's a little south of here on Cypress. But prior to moving there, it operated for some 20 or 30 years here in Old West Tampa, built in 1931. In front of us now is the McFarland building, which was built in 1905 to house the McFarland Investment Company, which brings up the name of what is undoubtedly the most important person in the development of West Tampa, and that's Hugh McFarland. He was a Scottish immigrant. He came here to Tampa in the 1880s, and he bought 200 acres of land in west of Tampa in what was basically swampland at the time, with the vision of building it into a city that would produce cigars and compete with and maybe eventually overtake Ybor City as the cigar making capital. Ybor City had the head start. They built their first cigar factory in 1886, but by 1893, McFarland had attracted investors to develop a cigar factory here. The first one didn't work out, but over the course of the next 3 decades, it grew that such by the 1920s, there were over 100 cigar factories here in West Tampa. Now, this building on the corner of Howard Avenue and Spruce Street has an interesting history. It's called the Cecilia Club, also called the Howard Theater. Cecilia Club was built in 1930, basically a social club for Italian immigrants in the area. But by 1938, under new ownership, it had converted into the Howard Theater and started showing uncensored romance films, things like Ecstasy, The Valley of the Nudes, and The Body Beautiful. I can't really imagine what late 1930s porn looked like, but Gore, the owner, had to navigate a lot of pushback from the authorities, sometimes getting arrested, usually released, but he was a pioneer before his time. when porn movies weren't exactly as accepted as they are in modern times. But we can thank B.E. Gore for being a pioneer in that area. Looks like a boxing gym here. Franklin Boxing. Well, getting back to Hugh McFarlane and the growth of the cigar industry here. In the early 1900s or even 1890s, McFarlane was key in developing this area, building roads, getting a streetcar here, having a bridge built over the Hillsborough River, which made it far more practical by about 1900 for this place to be a true capital of the cigar manufacturing industry. Many immigrants, primarily from Cuba, also from Spain, who had expertise in hand-rolling cigars, came here to work. And a lot of the factory owners from places like Key West relocated their factories here. And it was a booming time. There was growing population. By 1912, West Tampa, which, as I remind you, was its own city for 30 years, West Tampa was the 5th largest city in the state of Florida. So a far cry from the empty streets we see here today, because in those times it was booming. 1920s was at its peak, over 100 cigar factories, but then hard times started to come. 1930s saw the Depression, and that hurt the demand for premium cigars. Speaking of cigar factories, we do have one in front of us. This is the oldest still standing cigar factory in West Tampa. It's called the San Martin and Leon Cigar Factory. It was built in 1900, and it was active producing cigars until 1949. Now it's used as office space for an air conditioning repair company. In front of us is the Hillsborough Education Foundation. It's the former West Tampa branch of the Centro Espanol Club. It was built in 1913. There's still a Centro Espanol Club in Ybor City, and this was the West Tampa branch. It's back in an era where immigrants created buildings that were specifically kind of clubs for them. And as mentioned, because of the cigar industry, there was lots of Cuban immigrants here, also some immigrants from Spain. That was the focus of this particular club. Here's Ray, and this is Ray Park. It's named for Peregrino Ray. Peregrino was a factory worker who had emigrated here in West Tampa from Spain. He eventually rose up the ranks and became a factory owner, and after that became a politician. And he was the mayor. He was a two-term mayor of West Tampa when it was its own city. I believe in the 1913 range, the early 1910s. Well, getting back to the whole cigar industry in West Tampa and the ups and the downs. So, yeah, it was at its pinnacle in the 1920s, but in the 30s, the Depression really hit the demand of cigars. But even worse was the 1940s, when cigarettes overtook cigars. They were more easily produced by automated means, and machines kind of pushed aside the human labor. Most of these factories had like 100 or more hand rollers, and as technology improved, that really wasn't necessary when a machine could bust out 50 or 60 cigars or hundreds of cigarettes at the same rate that a human could manually. So that really hurt the industry. A lot of the factories started closing down. And then even a bigger hit happened in the early 1960s with the whole Cuban embargo starting, as the tobacco from Cuba as well as the labor from Cuba was a chief source of these factories. And with the embargo, you could no longer import that tobacco. So that really was a final blow to the industry that was already hurt for other reasons. Okay, we made a right turn onto Beach. It's a residential street. The namings of the streets here, Howard Avenue, which is over 3 miles long. It isn't just through this neighborhood. It goes south into South Tampa and basically connects South Tampa with West Tampa. It is named for Hugh McFarland's son, Howard McFarland. Howard was a lawyer, but other than that, I really couldn't find anything noteworthy about him. I think he's just famous because of his dad. So, but his dad basically had all the streets here named. Some of them were changed when they were incorporated in Tampa. For example, he named another avenue for his wife, Frances, but when Tampa annexed the area in 1925, the city of Tampa already had a Frances, so they couldn't have two Frances streets, so they renamed it Albany, which will be the next avenue that we're going to turn onto when we're going to see another cigar factory. The east-west streets are all named after types of trees: beech, pine, cherry, so nothing original there. It's very quiet here. It is a Sunday morning, but still. Even on Howard, you could walk in the middle of the street and just kind of look around every once in a while to see a car's not coming. And on these side streets, you can walk right in the middle of the street without any concern. It's just not a lot of activity. Unlike Ybor City, where you can probably get a lot of YouTube videos of people walking through, there's not a lot of videos on Old West Tampa, so hopefully this provides a service to some of y'all that are interested in forgotten neighborhoods. In front of us, we can see one of the major cigar factories here. This was the Pendis and Alvarez Cigar Company, built in 1908. Clearly a lot more than 100 people worked at this factory. You see a water tower up there. It's a 120-foot water and clock tower. So I don't know if you can see it in the video, but it still has the clock face on multiple sides. At the time this was built in 1908, that was the tallest structure in Tampa, or West Tampa. Actually, I think in all of Tampa. It's been unoccupied for some time, but was recently bought out by a wine company. So they'll be converting this into a wine distributor, and part of it will be a restaurant. So you'll be able to come here if you're interested in that in the near future. The eastern border of this old West Tampa neighborhood is Armenia Avenue, which those of you who live here are probably familiar with. Like Howard, it reaches for several miles, actually quite a bit longer than Howard as it goes deeper into North Tampa. Armenia Avenue was named after the Armina cigar factory that Hugh McFarland owned here. Now, it somehow got, I think it was a mistake in a signage, it got converted from Armina to Armenia. So it's a misnomer that the country of Armenia has a significant impact on Tampa. It was just a misspelling of Armina. A little while ago on Howard, we saw the oldest still standing cigar factory in West Tampa that was built in 1900. Here we have the second oldest that was built in 1902. It's the Bustillo and Diaz Cigar Company. It was operational until the mid-1960s. In recent years, it's been office space, but very recently it's been converted into what they call cigar lofts, which will serve as student housing. Here's some of those adjacent cigar lofts. A little unusual. First thing on my walk, that's kind of a modern, new-looking building. All the commercial and residential structures here seem to be pretty old, so this is clearly a different look from the rest of the neighborhood. All right, just checking out some of the houses here on Albany, formerly Francis Avenue. And I guess I could see how the real estate values might have bumped up. There's a kind of a mixture of smaller, rundown looking homes, but some of these look pretty nice. It's not a gentrified area, so it's not like Seminole Heights or some of those areas that have kind of become trendy. This one still has not. Maybe it will. It's kind of surprising it has not, given both its history and location, but yeah, largely speaking, it's still mostly forgotten. And that's kind of cool in a way, because if everything was gentrified or was like a trendy hotspot like Ybor City, then you wouldn't really have any feel for the history. In front of us is the Rosa Valdez settlement. This was actually set up, I don't have the year on hand, but this was set up as a schooling location for the children of the factory workers way back in the day. It's kind of a cool front patio ornament. All right, we're back where we started. I'm gonna take a short drive to the other side of the highway and check out one or two of the old cigar factories on the other side that are still standing. We're now just a little bit south of the old West Tampa area we just walked through, and behind me you see the Samuel L. Davis Cigar Factory. This was built in 1911 and operated through 1954. Samuel L. Davis immigrated here from New York, unlike most of the factory owners who came from places like Spain, Cuba, or Key West. By the way, what's up with L for everyone whose first name is Samuel having a middle initial of L? Anyway, this Sammy Davis, I don't think was the entertainer in Las Vegas, but he built up one of the largest factories here in Old West Tampa. It has been abandoned for 30 years, and it is for sale for $1.3 million, which, given its size and location, seems like a pretty good price. Here's a view from the front. Most of the side is fenced up, so I don't think we can get inside. Here's a view from the back. Also fenced in, doesn't look like there's any holes. Now we're about 3 blocks north of the Samuel L. Davis factory, and we're at the Balbin Brothers factory. This one was built in 1904. We're about 3 blocks south of Main Street, just on the other side of 275. It operated from 1904 to 1934, after which it became a brewery for some time. Now it's going to be transformed into a hotel. Here's a view from the other side. It's also fenced off. Think about climbing over and checking it out, but it's all sorts of do not trespass signs all around, so probably not worth it just for this video. There's the front of the building. And let's check out 1 or 2 more factories that are over on Armenia Avenue. Here's the last stop on our tour. This is the Santinella Cigar Factory. It was built here in 1904 and operated until 1934. This one is off of Armenia Avenue, so it's a little more to the west of most of those that we saw today. There's plans to convert this building into a microbrewery. There's actually some cars parked here, so maybe there's work going on already on that. And here's a view of that Santinella Cigar Factory from the front. So of the 6 or 7 or 8, I think there's 8 total still standing cigar factories in West Tampa. None of them are operating. They're all just relics of the past, either repurposed or abandoned. So the area really hasn't leveraged its past as a cigar manufacturer the way Ybor City has, where even though it's not anything to the level that it used to be in the past, you have plenty of small cigar rolling tourist shops on 7th Avenue in Ybor City. So maybe there's some potential there. This is Armenia Avenue, the western boundary of Old West Tampa. Across the street from us on Armenia Avenue is the Garcia and Vega Cigar Factory. It's the last one on our tour today. This one was built in 1908. And it's currently occupied by the Oliva Tobacco Company, which is a longtime supplier to many cigar manufacturers. So this is really the only tie to the industry that defined this area so much in the first half of the 20th century. Just going to take a side view of the building. And that covers it for today. Saw 6 or 7 of the few remaining cigar manufacturers. Got to check out Howard Avenue and Main Street, what was once West Tampa, the 5th largest city in Florida, now just kind of a forgotten neighborhood in Tampa. So anyway, hope you enjoyed the trip, and see you next time.